on Cuba. We saw the president's statement today about the demonstrations there on the island yesterday. Two questions on that. But why hasn't President Biden taken steps to undo some of the things that his predecessor, Donald Trump, did to overturn the overtures made by President Obama? And then secondly, we heard there's obviously a great cry yesterday, or during these protests, for vaccines. Has Cuba on the list to get vaccines for the United States?
Well, first let me say that we have actually provided, over the course of the last several months, a great deal of assistance to Cuba. I just want to note this because I think it's important for people to understand. Since 2009, which is quite some time ago, Congress has directed $20 million in democracy assistance annually. But even if you look at last year alone, the U.S. exported $176 million of goods to Cuba. In the first 6 months of 2021, Cuba imported $123 million worth of chicken from the United States. Just as an example, obviously one of the issues that that protesters are justifiably out there in the streets protesting about is hunger, is lack of access to vaccines, et cetera. But we are continuing to provide a range of assistance, which we will continue to do. I will say on vaccines, one of the challenges, Jonathan, which you may be familiar with, is that Cuba has not joined COVAX. And has indicated they intend to vaccinate their population using the Abdala vaccine, which the Pan American Health Organization has been out there urging Cuban scientists to publish their results in the peer-reviewed literature on this vaccine. So in terms of COVAX would be a mechanism that we have provided, as you all know, vaccines to a range of countries in the world. We certainly recognize and understand that access to vaccines is one of the issues that a number of individuals in the streets is voicing concern about, but we have to determine what the mechanism would be to work with the Cuban people to get vaccines to them. That's something we're working through. Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Jen, just to follow up on Cuba, can you give us a sense of where the president's policy review on Cuba is right now? Do you anticipate making any changes, as Jonathan asked, and where do you see it going from here?
Well, I will say first, and I meant to say this in response to Jonathan, but there's every indication that yesterday's protests were spontaneous expressions of people who are exhausted with the Cuban government's economic mismanagement and repression. And these are protests inspired by the harsh reality of everyday life in Cuba, not people in another country. I'm saying that because I think there have been a range of accusations out there, as you well know, Jeff. In terms of our assessment of a future, our policy, I should say, it continues to be, our approach continues to be governed by two principles. First, support for democracy and human rights, which is going to continue to be at the core of our efforts through empowering the Cuban people to determine their own future. Second, Americans, especially Cuban Americans, are the best ambassadors for freedom and prosperity in Cuba. I don't have anything to predict for you in terms of any policy shift. Obviously, given the protests were just happening over the last 24 to 48 hours, we're assessing how we can be helpful directly to the people of Cuba in these circumstances.
You hinted at this, but the president of Cuba did directly accuse the United States of basically fomenting these protests because of the embargo and that leading to a lack of medicine and the other things. Do you have a specific response to him?
Well, I'd first say that the U.S. embargo allows humanitarian goods to reach Cuba. We expedite any request to export humanitarian or medical supplies to Cuba. That continues to be the case. And the United States regularly authorizes the export of agricultural products, medicine, medical equipment, and humanitarian goods to Cuba. And since 1992 has authorized the export of billions of dollars of those goods to Cuba. So that's simply inaccurate in terms of the facts that are stated. But again, I would restate what I said a little bit earlier in response, which is that there's every indication that yesterday's protests were reactions of the people in Cuba to exhaustion of the governance of the leaders in the state, the economic mismanagement and the repression that we're seeing take place against the people of the country.